What happens when one of the biggest stars in entertainment sits down for what should be a routine late-night interview, only to have the host cross every line imaginable? Tonight, we're breaking down the explosive confrontation that left Jennifer Lopez storming off the Jimmy Kimmel live set in a fury that shocked everyone in that studio. This isn't just another celebrity tantrum. This is what happens when professionalism completely breaks down on live television. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story gets more intense by the minute. The atmosphere in the Jimmy Kimmel live studio felt different that Tuesday night. Jennifer Lopez had arrived looking stunning as always, wearing a sleek black dress that commanded attention, her hair perfectly styled, radiating the confidence that had made her a global icon for decades. The audience was electric with anticipation. This was supposed to be a straightforward promotional interview for her latest project, the kind of appearance she had done hundreds of times before. But from the moment she walked onto that stage, something felt off. Jimmy Kimmel greeted her with his usual theatrical enthusiasm, but there was an edge to his demeanor that the cameras barely captured. As Lopez settled into the guest chair, adjusting her dress and flashing that million-dollar smile to the audience, Kimmel was already shuffling through his note cards with an expression that seemed more predatory than professional. The band finished, their musical flourish. The applause died down, and what should have been a pleasant conversation was about to turn into something far more sinister. Kimmel started innocently enough, asking about her new project with the kind of softball questions that usually open these interviews. Lopez responded with practiced grace, discussing her work with the passion and articulation that had made her such a compelling interview subject over the years. She spoke about the creative process, the challenges of balancing multiple projects, and her excitement about connecting with fans. The audience was engaged, laughing at her anecdotes, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly normal. But then Kimmel shifted gears in a way that immediately changed the entire tone of the conversation. Instead of following up on her professional achievements, he leaned back in his chair with a smirk that made Lopez's smile falter just slightly. The transition was so subtle that viewers at home might have missed it, but everyone in that studio could feel the energy change. Kimmel's questions became more personal, more invasive, delivered with a tone that suggested he was more interested in creating drama than conducting an interview. The first red flag came when Kimmel brought up her past relationships, not in the respectful way that entertainment journalists typically handle such topics, but with a leering curiosity that made Lopez visibly uncomfortable. She handled it professionally at first, giving diplomatic responses that neither confirmed nor denied the rumors he was fishing for. But Kimmel wasn't satisfied with diplomatic answers. He pressed harder, asking increasingly inappropriate questions about her personal life, her choices, her past mistakes, all delivered with that trademark Kimmel grin that made everything seem like a joke even when it clearly wasn't. Lopez's body language began to change. The relaxed posture she had maintained at the beginning of the interview became more rigid. Her smile, which had been genuine and warm, started to look forced. She began giving shorter answers, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but Kimmel seemed determined to push every boundary he could find. The audience, initially delighted to be witnessing what they thought was playful banter, began to sense that something was wrong. The breaking point started building, when Kimmel made a comment about her age, disguised as a compliment but delivered with an undertone that made it feel like an insult. Lopez's eyes flashed with anger for just a moment before she composed herself, but Kimmel had seen that reaction, and it seemed to encourage him rather than warn him off. He followed up with another comment, this one about her appearance that crossed the line from inappropriate to downright offensive. Lopez looked directly at Kimmel, her voice steady but with an edge that anyone paying attention could hear clearly. She told him that she didn't appreciate the direction the interview was taking and suggested they focus on her work instead of her personal life. It was a reasonable request, delivered professionally, the kind of course correction that experienced interviewers handle gracefully all the time. But Kimmel's response revealed just how far he was willing to go to get the reaction he seemed to be seeking. Instead of apologizing or changing the subject, Kimmel doubled down. He made a joke about her response, treating her legitimate concern, as if it were part of the entertainment. The audience laughed nervously, unsure whether this was scripted banter or something more serious. Lopez's expression darkened considerably. She was no longer trying to hide her displeasure, and the tension in the studio became palpable. What happened next would be the moment that everyone in that audience would remember for the rest of their lives, the moment when a routine celebrity interview transformed into something much more explosive and uncomfortable. Kimmel leaned forward with that calculated smirk, completely ignoring the warning signs that were now impossible to miss. He launched into what he probably thought was his most clever line of the night, a comment so inappropriate and degrading that it made several audience members gasp audibly. He questioned her talent, suggesting that her success was based more on her looks and controversy than any actual ability, wrapping the insult in the kind of fake humor that bullies use to disguise their cruelty. Lopez's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Her entire posture changed as she sat up straighter, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made it clear she was done playing along with whatever game Kimmel thought he was playing. The professional mask she had been maintaining throughout this increasingly hostile interview finally slipped, and what the audience saw was the real Jennifer Lopez, a woman who had worked incredibly hard for everything she had achieved and wasn't about to let anyone diminish that effort. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was controlled but filled with barely contained fury. She told Kimmel exactly what she thought of his comment, pointing out that she had been working in entertainment longer than many people in that audience had been alive, that she had earned every single thing she had accomplished through talent, dedication, and relentless hard work. She reminded him that she was there as his guest, not as his target, and that his behavior was not only unprofessional, but deeply disrespectful. The audience fell completely silent. This wasn't the playful celebrity banter they had expected when they bought their tickets. This was a real confrontation happening right in front of them, and the discomfort in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Camera operators weren't sure where to focus. Producers in the control room were probably having panic attacks, and everyone could sense that this interview was spiraling completely out of control. But instead of backing down or apologizing, Kimmel made the situation exponentially worse. He actually laughed at her response, dismissing her anger as if it were unreasonable, as if she were being overly sensitive about his completely inappropriate behavior. He made another joke, this one even more cutting than the last, suggesting that her reaction proved his point about her being difficult to work with. The cruelty in his tone was no longer disguised by humor. It was raw and obvious. Lopez stood up from her chair so abruptly that it made a scraping sound against the floor that seemed to echo through the silent studio. She looked down at Kimmel, with an expression of pure disgust, her voice shaking with controlled rage as she told him exactly what kind of person she thought he was. She called out his behavior for what it was: unprofessional, misogynistic, and completely unacceptable. She pointed out that she had been nothing but gracious and professional throughout the entire interview, while he had been deliberately trying to humiliate her for his own entertainment. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. Lopez was standing, towering over Kimmel, who remained seated, looking suddenly smaller and less confident than he had moments before. She continued her verbal assault, methodically dismantling every excuse he might have had for his behavior. She reminded him that she was a guest on his show, that she had come there to promote her work and connect with fans, not to be subjected to his personal attacks disguised as comedy. Kimmel's response revealed just how deep his disrespect truly ran. Instead of apologizing, instead of acknowledging that he had crossed multiple lines, he actually tried to turn the situation around on her. He suggested that she couldn't take a joke, that she was being unprofessional, that his audience expected a certain kind of entertainment. The audacity of his response left even the most loyal Kimmel fans in the audience stunned. He was essentially blaming her for his own inappropriate behavior. Lopez's laugh was cold and humorless as she shook her head in disbelief. She told him that there was a difference between comedy and cruelty, between entertainment and humiliation. She pointed out that real comedians, professional comedians, didn't need to tear down their guests to get laughs. She reminded him that respect was a basic requirement for any professional interaction, something that he seemed to have forgotten completely. The tension in the studio was now unbearable. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some whispering to each other, others just staring in shock at the confrontation playing out before them. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a public breakdown of professional courtesy, and everyone could see that Kimmel was entirely at fault. But Kimmel wasn't finished. In what would prove to be his biggest mistake of the night, he made one final comment that was so offensive, so deliberately hurtful, that it crossed every remaining line. He attacked not just her career, not just her appearance, but her character. Suggesting that her success had come through means that had nothing to do with talent or hard work. The comment was vile, indefensible, and delivered with a malicious smile that made it clear he knew exactly how hurtful his words were. The effect on Lopez was instantaneous and volcanic. Her face flushed with anger as she took a step closer to his desk, her voice rising as she unleashed a response that would become the defining moment of the entire confrontation. Lopez's response was devastating in its precision and fury. Her voice cut through the stunned silence of the studio like a blade as she systematically destroyed every aspect of Kimmel's character and professionalism. She told him that in all her years in the entertainment industry, through countless interviews with hosts around the world, she had never encountered someone so deliberately cruel, so unprofessional, so completely lacking in basic human decency. She called him a bully hiding behind the pretense of comedy, a small man who could only feel important by trying to tear down people who had accomplished more than he ever would. The audience sat in complete shock as Lopez continued her verbal demolition. She pointed out that real entertainers, real comedians, lifted people up rather than tearing them down. She reminded him that his job was supposed to be making people laugh, not making his guests uncomfortable for his own twisted amusement, shows. Told him that he had revealed exactly what kind of person he truly was, and it wasn't someone worthy of the platform he had been given. Kimmel's face had gone pale as Lopez spoke. The confident smirk that had characterized his behavior throughout the interview had completely disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. He tried to interrupt her several times, attempting to regain control of the situation, but Lopez wasn't finished. She had been pushed too far, and now all of that contained fury was pouring out in a torrent of perfectly articulated rage. She told him that she had built her career through decades of hard work, through facing challenges and obstacles that he couldn't even imagine. She reminded him that she had started with nothing and earned everything through talent, determination, and an unbreakable work ethic. She pointed out that while he sat behind his desk making cruel jokes about people braver than himself, she had been out there actually creating, actually building something meaningful, actually contributing to the world in ways that mattered. The power in her voice was undeniable as she continued her assault on his character. She told him that his behavior revealed a deep insecurity, a desperate need to make himself feel important by diminishing others. She suggested that maybe if he focused more on being genuinely funny instead of being mean-spirited, his show might actually be worth watching. The brutal honesty of her words left everyone in the studio speechless. Kimmel finally managed to find his voice, but what came out was exactly the wrong thing to say. He actually tried to defend himself, claiming that everything he had said was just part of the show, just entertainment, just comedy. He suggested that she was overreacting, that she should have expected this kind of treatment when she agreed to come on his show. The complete lack of accountability in his response made Lopez's eyes flash with renewed anger. Her final response to him was quiet, but absolutely lethal. She told him that hiding behind the excuse of comedy was the refuge of cowards, that real comedians took responsibility for their words and their impact on others. She pointed out that what he called entertainment, the rest of the world would recognize as harassment and unprofessional conduct. She told him that she had agreed to come on his show to promote her work and connect with fans, not to be subjected to his personal attacks and twisted idea of humor. Then came the moment that would define the entire confrontation. Lopez looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home rather than the man who had spent the last several minutes trying to humiliate her. She told viewers that they deserved better entertainment than watching someone try to tear down their guests. She reminded them that real talent didn't need to diminish others to shine, that genuine comedy came from creativity and intelligence, not from cruelty and insecurity. She turned back to Kimmel one final time, her voice steady and controlled despite the obvious anger still burning in her eyes. She told him that she had been in the entertainment industry long enough to recognize the difference between a professional and an amateur, between someone who respected their guests and someone who used them for their own pathetic amusement. She made it clear that she would not sit there for one more second and allow him to continue his unprofessional behavior. The silence in the studio was deafening as Lopez gathered her purse and prepared to leave. Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation, calling out to her, trying to convince her to sit back down, claiming that they could start over, that he had just been trying to make good television. But Lopez didn't even acknowledge his words. She had said everything she needed to say, and his time to make things right had long since passed. As she walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the studio floor in the complete silence, every eye in that room was on her. The audience members sat frozen, unsure whether to applaud, boo, or just sit in stunned silence. Camera operators followed her movement, capturing every step of what had become the most dramatic exit in late-night television history. She moved with dignity and purpose, her head held high, making it clear that while Kimmel had tried to diminish her, he had failed completely. The last image of Jennifer Lopez that night was of her walking through the studio doors without looking back, leaving behind a host who had revealed himself to be everything wrong with certain corners of the entertainment industry. The confrontation had lasted less than 15 minutes, but it had exposed truths about respect, professionalism, and human decency that would resonate far beyond that studio. What did you think about Jennifer Lopez's handling of this situation? Was her response justified? Or do you think she should have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that define entertainment history.